In the far reaches of the galaxy, where civilizations arose and fell like fleeting stars, an ancient alien empire known as the Vrak had expanded its influence, enslaving countless species across countless worlds. The Vrak were a race of towering beings, their physiology and technology far superior to any other, save one, humanity. The humans, newly thrust into the galactic stage, had never sought war or conflict. They had barely learned to conquer their own planet, let alone the stars. But all that was about to change. The Vrak had first encountered Earth during an exploratory mission, their scouts inadvertently stumbling upon a primitive world, lush and full of potential. Initially, they saw humans as little more than a curious curiosity, a species too young to be of consequence. However, the Vrak made a crucial mistake by underestimating humanity's capacity for survival, resilience, and, most of all, unity in the face of adversity. It began with the Vrak's declaration of dominance. A fleet of enormous ships descended upon Earth, their sleek, metallic hulls blocking out the sun, casting the world in a cold, unnatural shadow. At first, the world leaders attempted diplomacy, believing that these extraterrestrials were merely another challenge to face in a rapidly changing world. But they were wrong. The Vrak's response was swift and brutal: planetary subjugation. Entire cities were leveled in a matter of hours. The Vrak's weapons, capable of tearing through reinforced steel like paper, decimated Earth's militaries, leaving them powerless against the onslaught. In a flash, humanity's most powerful nations were reduced to rubble, their populations fleeing into hiding or being taken as prisoners. But humanity had a secret weapon that the Vrak didn't anticipate: an unyielding spirit. It was in the very fabric of their DNA, a resilience that refused to break, no matter the odds. As the Vrak's war machine ground forward, laying waste to Earth's once thriving cities, a small group of survivors began to organize. These were not the governments or powerful leaders that had once held sway over the world. No, this group was made up of ordinary people: a mechanic from Detroit, a farmer from Iowa, a doctor from Tokyo, a soldier from Sydney, and a scientist from Berlin. They represented every corner of the Earth, united not by nationality or political ideology, but by their shared love of their planet and the determination to protect it. The leader of this ragtag group was Captain Sarah Caldwell, a former military officer who had survived the initial assault on Earth. Caldwell was no longer concerned with the titles or ranks she had once held. Her mission now was clear: to rally humanity's last hope and lead them in a desperate fight to reclaim their home from the alien invaders. "We may not have the weapons, the ships, or the technology," Captain Caldwell said, her voice calm yet filled with a quiet fire. "But we have something they don't. We have each other, and we have the will to fight. We will show them that they picked the wrong species to conquer." The resistance grew in number, with every nation joining the cause, uniting under one banner: humanity's last stand. While the Vrak focused on suppressing Earth's major cities, the humans began to form an underground network, gathering their forces and scrounging for whatever weapons they could find. It wasn't long before the Vrak began to take notice of the humans' resolve. They initially dismissed the resistance as nothing more than a nuisance, a fleeting annoyance that would be snuffed out in time. But the more they fought, the more they realized that the humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something far greater: their future. This realization was echoed by High Commander Volker, the Vrak leader who had overseen Earth's invasion. He was a calculating strategist, his cold, alien mind ever focused on the big picture. And yet, as he watched the humans rise from the ashes, he began to question their resolve. "They fight like cornered animals," Volker mused to his council, his towering form casting a long shadow over the war room. "But there's something more, something primal about them. They fight not just for themselves, but for their families, their world. That is dangerous." The Vrak had never encountered a species quite like humanity before. In every battle, the humans fought with a desperation that made them unpredictable, willing to risk everything to keep their planet safe. They were scrappy, resourceful, and above all, relentless. And so, the war between the Vrak and humanity began in earnest. It was a conflict that would shake the galaxy to its core, as the mighty alien empire would soon learn what happens when they challenge the strength of human resolve. The universe had underestimated humanity, and now it would be forced to reckon with the consequences. The human resistance, though small, was a spark of defiance in the darkness. It was a reminder to the galaxy that no matter how powerful the enemy, no matter how overwhelming the odds, the human spirit could never be crushed. The Vrak had begun a war they could not win. The war had only just begun, and the resistance, though emboldened by the idea of fighting back, was still a fragile force. Humanity was learning how to wage a war on a galactic scale, but the Vrak were far from the mindless conquerors they had first appeared to be. Commander Voker's strategies were brutal and calculated. He unleashed a wave of devastating attacks on Earth's remaining strongholds, hoping to break the Resistance's spirit before it had a chance to grow. But despite the overwhelming force of the Vrak, something remarkable was happening. Human ingenuity, born from centuries of struggle and evolution, was adapting at a pace the invaders hadn't anticipated. They may not have had advanced starships or energy weapons on par with the Vrak, but the humans were crafty. They knew their terrain better than any alien invader ever could, and they used that knowledge to their advantage. Sarah Caldwell's resistance force had set up hidden bases, deep within forests, underground bunkers, and abandoned cities that the Vrak had thought were already wiped off the map. These guerrilla tactics were what kept the Vrak at bay, forcing them into a war of attrition they hadn't prepared for. In the mountains of Colorado, they set up an encrypted communications network, allowing various resistance cells to coordinate strikes across continents. In the Arctic tundra, a small team of scientists worked feverishly on a new form of energy weapon, something that could pierce the Vrak's seemingly impenetrable armor. The small victories started to add up. In rural villages, farmers used their land's natural resources to build crude but effective traps that slowed the Vrak's advance. Civilians who once hid in fear were now taking up arms, defending their homes with a fury that no alien force could match. And in the cities that remained, pockets of humanity were staging insurgent strikes, disrupting Vrak supply lines and sowing chaos behind enemy lines. In one such attack, a group of resistance fighters managed to infiltrate a Vrak supply depot in what was once Paris. They sabotaged the weapons stored there, turning the depot's vast arsenal against the very invaders it was meant to supply. The explosion that followed was heard across the continent, signaling a shift in the tide. The humans, once thought weak and divided, were now making their presence felt. But as the Vrak grew more frustrated, they turned their attention to the human leaders, focusing their attacks on those who led the resistance. They launched a brutal counteroffensive, targeting key locations where Caldwell and her allies had gathered to plan their next moves. The Vrak's response was nothing short of merciless. Whole towns were wiped out in retaliation. Voker's orders were simple: crush the heart of humanity's resistance, and the rest would fall in line. Sarah Caldwell knew that the time for small, covert victories was running out. The humans could no longer afford to be just a thorn in the side of the Vrak. They had to become a full-fledged force capable of challenging the alien empire on a larger scale. But they were still outmatched in terms of firepower, and Caldwell knew that their survival depended on an unprecedented gamble. "I have an idea," she said to her most trusted lieutenant, Marcus Lee, a former soldier who had been at her side from the beginning. "We need to hit them where it hurts the most." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The Vrak are scattered across the planet. Where could we possibly hurt them?" Caldwell leaned forward, her expression intense. "We're going to hit their command ship. If we take down Voker, the whole empire will be thrown into chaos. The Vrak won't be able to function without their leader. It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we've got." The plan was risky, suicidal, even, but Caldwell had come to a harsh realization: this was no longer a war to survive. It was a war to win. And if humanity was to have any hope of reclaiming their world, they had to strike at the heart of the Vrak Empire. In the days that followed, the resistance gathered their most skilled operatives, each one hand-picked for their expertise in sabotage, combat, and survival. They had no starships, no fleet of ships to get them to the Vrak flagship. Instead, they would rely on a single, stolen Vrak vessel, a small scout ship that had been commandeered in one of their previous victories. The ship, though damaged, was the only way they could hope to infiltrate the Vrak's heavily guarded flagship. As the crew of the stolen vessel prepared for their perilous journey, the atmosphere was tense. The mission was everything. Failure meant not just death, but the end of the human race's last chance to stop the Vrock. Marcus Lee stood at the helm, preparing the ship for takeoff, while Sarah Caldwell took a final moment to address her team. "Remember," she said, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of the task ahead, "we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for every future that will never come if we fail today." With a final glance at the planet they had called home, the Resistance launched their desperate mission into the heart of the Vrock Empire, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them in the vastness of space. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about saving a future that had yet to be written. The stolen Vrock vessel, a sleek craft built for reconnaissance rather than warfare, cut through the atmosphere, the roar of the engines muffled by the vast expanse of space. Inside, Sarah Caldwell and her team sat in tense silence, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on them. They had trained for months, prepared for every contingency, but nothing could truly ready them for the perilous journey they now undertook. Approaching the Vrock flagship, Marcus Lee's voice crackled over the comms, his tone focused but edged with tension. "We'll need to be quick. If we're detected, we'll be vaporized before we can even react." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the holographic map in front of her. The Vrock flagship, a colossal battle cruiser known as the Vokter, hovered in orbit around a moon, heavily guarded by countless drones and automated defense systems. The ship was a fortress in itself, a symbol of Voker's unchallenged power. Getting close enough to even attempt an infiltration would require stealth, something the human resistance had learned to use to their advantage in this war. "We have one shot," Sarah said, her voice calm yet resolute. "Marcus, you know what to do. Disable the sensors, give us a window to get inside." Marcus gripped the controls tightly, sweat beading on his brow. "I'll do my best, but once we're in their range, we won't have long. They'll see us eventually." The team had learned the Vrock's patrol patterns and had spent weeks tracking their movements, gathering intel on their weaknesses. They knew the Vokter was due for a shift change, an opportunity they had to seize. If they could sneak past the outer defenses undetected, they'd have a narrow window to board the ship, plant their charges, and sabotage its systems. Sarah stood up, her mind sharp and ready for the mission ahead. "Everyone knows their roles. Stay focused, stay silent, and if we're caught, we fight. But we're not planning to be caught. Let's move." With a swift motion, Marcus executed the plan. He hacked into the ship's controls, initiating a brief pulse of interference that cloaked the Vrock vessel in a field of static, rendering their sensors temporarily blind. The trick wouldn't last long, but it was enough. They were in. As the stolen ship approached the Vokter, the massive battleship loomed ever closer, a testament to the Vrock's dominance. The vessel was an intimidating sight, towering, angular, and adorned with alien markings that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. But for all its grandeur, it was also its greatest weakness. It was so large, so fortified, that it had become complacent in its security. It was a fortress in space, sure, but even a fortress could be infiltrated if the right hands were at the controls. "Steady," Sarah said softly, eyes narrowing as the countdown ticked down. The moment arrived faster than anyone anticipated. As they neared the docking bay, a momentary ripple of static indicated that their brief cloak was about to fail. They had to act fast. The small vessel skimmed just under the Vokter's shields and aligned with an auxiliary access port on the underside of the flagship. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, and Marcus quickly maneuvered the ship inside. "We're in," he breathed, his voice tight. "Hang on. We're going dark now." The team quickly disembarked, donning their suits of tactical armor designed to withstand the Vrock's intense energy fields. Sarah's team had only one goal now: to reach the core of the ship and plant explosives near the command center. Once that was done, they would disable the ship's control systems, ensuring the flagship would be crippled, and without its leader, the Vrock's entire war machine would be thrown into disarray. But as they moved through the corridors of the Vokter, it became evident that the Vrock were not as complacent as they'd hoped. The tight, sterile hallways were silent, but the air was thick with the anticipation of battle. The Vrock's surveillance systems may have been temporarily disabled, but their instincts were far sharper than any technology. As the team crept forward, they could hear the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps, Vrock guards on patrol. "I don't like this," whispered Jada, a former intelligence officer who had been on the front lines since the beginning of the war. "They've got to know something's wrong." Sarah motioned for her team to move quickly and quietly. They couldn't afford to make any noise. They had to trust that their training, their stealth, and their knowledge of Vrock tactics would keep them hidden long enough to reach their destination. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a pair of Vrock soldiers. Time seemed to slow as both sides froze. The alien soldiers, towering and armored, blinked as if confused by the human presence. But before they could react, Sarah and Marcus were already in motion. In a blur, they neutralized the guards, silently disabling them with a series of expertly placed strikes to their pressure points. They weren't here for a fight, they were here for destruction. "Let's go," Sarah ordered, her voice calm despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. They continued their stealthy advance, moving deeper into the bowels of the ship. The deeper they went, the more aware they became of the scale of the Vokter. It wasn't just a warship, it was a living, breathing organism. The walls pulsed with an eerie glow, and strange humming sounds reverberated through the ship's corridors. This was no ordinary vessel, it was a monument to the Vrock's obsession with power. At long last, they reached the central command room. It was guarded by a series of complex security systems, but after weeks of preparation, the team was ready. Jada cracked the final code, and the door slid open. Inside, they found the heart of the ship, a massive, glowing control room filled with rows of consoles and holographic displays. And at the center of it all, bathed in an eerie, violet light, stood the Vrock High Commander Voker's personal command seat. "We're here," Sarah whispered. "It's time to end this." With a quick motion, they planted the explosives near the central control unit, setting the timers for a swift, powerful detonation. The countdown had begun. There was no turning back. But as they prepared to leave, a voice rang out from the shadows. Voker himself had arrived. The true battle had just begun. The air in the command room seemed to thicken as the towering figure of High Commander Voker emerged from the shadows. His massive form, adorned in intricately patterned battle armor, glowed faintly in the low light. His sharp, angular features were a study of cold alien precision, and his eyes, bright yellow and reptilian, narrowed as he took in the humans standing before him. "So," Voker's voice was like the hiss of a serpent, smooth and dripping with disdain, "this is how you repay my generosity? A few insignificant pests sneak into my ship, expecting to disrupt my control. I will enjoy extinguishing you." Sarah Caldwell's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. The plan had been simple: sabotage the Vokter, take out Voker's command systems, and escape before anyone realized they had infiltrated the flagship. But now, they were face to face with the very leader of the Vrock, the most formidable being they had ever encountered. Voker's hand drifted toward the controls, his long fingers pressing against a shimmering panel on the wall. "You are brave, but foolish. Did you think I wouldn't notice the subtle interference in my ship's systems? Did you think the Vrock are blind to such things?" His lips curled into a sneer. "No, you didn't just infiltrate my ship. You've walked into your graves." Sarah's mind raced as she calculated their odds. They had planted the explosives, but Voker was more than just a leader, he was a warlord, and his strength went beyond his intellect. In the war they had fought so far, humanity had relied on cunning and stealth, not brute force. And now, standing before them was the embodiment of the very thing they had struggled to defeat. "Do you know why we've been so successful in our conquest of your planet?" Voker continued, stepping forward with menacing precision. "Because the Vrock are unlike anything you've ever faced. We are not bound by your human weaknesses, your emotions, your attachments. We do not falter in the face of adversity. We destroy." His voice was steady, almost calm, but Sarah could hear the underlying rage in his words. He didn't just view this as a threat to his empire, he saw it as an affront to his very existence. Marcus Lee gripped his blaster, but Sarah put a hand on his arm. "No, not yet," she whispered. There was only one way out of this, and she needed to buy them time. "I'm not here to talk about our weaknesses, Voker," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. "I'm here to end this. To show you that your empire will fall." Voker laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that shook the room. "You humans are nothing more than a fleeting anomaly. You cannot fight a force like the Vrak. Your resilience, your resolve, is nothing compared to the vast power of my people." The commander's words were laced with arrogance, but Sarah knew that beneath the bravado, there was doubt. The Vrak had underestimated humanity. They had thought that the invasion would be swift and easy, that the humans would crumble under pressure. But now, after weeks of resistance, it was clear that humanity was capable of more than just survival, it was capable of triumph. She nodded toward Marcus. "Now." In an instant, Marcus leapt into action, firing a shot that struck the ceiling above them, sending debris cascading down. The explosion was enough to disorient the Vrak soldiers who had been silently approaching from behind, but it also set off the countdown to the explosives they had planted. The room shook violently, and a series of alarms blared. Voker turned his head toward the flashing red lights, his eyes widening in fury. "What have you done?" "We've taken out your command systems," Sarah replied, her voice steely. "And now your precious ship is doomed." Voker's anger surged like a tidal wave, and he rushed toward the control panel with terrifying speed. But before he could reach it, Sarah and her team were already in motion, drawing their weapons and taking cover. "We have to leave now," Jada shouted, as the room began to shake violently, the sounds of structural damage reverberating through the walls. "We won't make it in time," Marcus said grimly, eyeing the countdown. They had moments, maybe less. "There's no way off this ship unless we're in pieces." "We're not leaving," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "Not without Voker. Take him down. We finish this now." Voker spun to face them, his eyes blazing with fury. He raised his hand, and in a flash, his gauntlet crackled with energy. A surge of force blasted toward them, forcing the resistance to scatter for cover. But Sarah was already moving, darting toward the left side of the room, drawing his attention. She kept her eyes locked on him, daring him to make the first move. As the Vrak commander advanced, his movements were fluid, inhumanly fast, a blur of sheer power and grace. His gauntlet discharged blasts of energy, each one capable of obliterating anything in its path. She couldn't fight him head-on, not like this. He was too strong, too fast. She needed to outsmart him, just like they'd done throughout the war. "Jada," Sarah barked. "Disrupt his energy field. Now." Jada, without hesitation, activated a small device from her belt, a last-ditch plan they had been saving for this exact moment. The device emitted a pulse, aimed directly at Voker's gauntlet, short-circuiting its power for just a few crucial seconds. The disruption was enough to momentarily disable Voker's weapon, giving Sarah the opening she needed. With quick precision, she leaped forward, slamming into the Vrak leader and tackling him to the ground. It wasn't strength that made her successful, but the element of surprise. The fall shattered Voker's hold on his weapon, and for a brief moment, he was vulnerable. Before he could recover, Marcus and the others surged forward, using every trick in their arsenal to keep the Vrak commander off balance. The battle was fierce, but Voker's power had its limits. For the first time, he realized that humanity was more than just a nuisance. In the chaos, the countdown to the explosion reached its final moments. Sarah grabbed the control panel and pressed a button to send a pulse, activating the final detonation. "There's no escape for you, Voker," she shouted. Voker's eyes widened in realization. The Vokter was doomed. The explosion tore through the heart of the ship, and with it, the Vrak's hopes of conquering Earth. The last battle had been fought, not with overwhelming force, but with human resolve. And now, the empire that had thought itself invincible was in ruins. As the Vokter shook and crumbled, Sarah Caldwell and her team fought their way out, knowing this was only the beginning of a much larger war. The Vrak had been beaten, but the universe was still watching. And humanity was ready to show them all that they had only just begun. The explosion reverberated through the Vakther, shaking the very foundation of the Vrak flagship. Flames surged from the cracks in the walls, and the ship's once imposing control systems flickered and shut down. As the command center collapsed into chaos, Sarah Caldwell and her team fought their way back to the docking bay, each step fueled by a single, unyielding thought: survive. The blast had taken out Voker's central command and most of the ship's automated systems, but the Vakther was still alive, barely. The great warship groaned as it struggled to stay in orbit. Without Voker's leadership, the Vrak were scattered, confused, and disoriented. The tide of war had turned, but humanity was far from safe. "Marcus, can we get the ship off this wreckage?" Sarah panted, her voice tight with urgency as she glanced over her shoulder at the growing flames behind them. "Working on it," Marcus responded, his fingers flying across the console of their stolen vessel, now docked in the crumbling bay. He swore under his breath as the system sputtered in response to the damage. "This is going to be a one-shot deal. We need to get clear of the explosion radius in 10 minutes or we're toast." "Understood," Sarah said, her pulse quickening. The countdown was ticking, and the reality of their mission weighed heavily on her. They had just dealt a blow to the heart of the Vrak Empire, but they were still on the enemy's flagship, and they weren't alone. From behind them, the sound of armored footsteps echoed, signaling that reinforcements had arrived. A small battalion of Vrak soldiers, possibly survivors or newly deployed units, were quickly advancing. They had not yet realized the full scope of the destruction. Their commander was gone, their ship was dying, but they were still dangerous. "We're not getting out of here unless we clear a path," Jada shouted, gripping her pulse rifle as she scanned the room. Sarah nodded. "We'll fight our way out. It's all we can do." The battle that followed was quick but brutal. Vrak soldiers, their angular bodies encased in heavy armor, charged at them with brutal force. The humans, though outgunned, had the advantage of desperation and determination. Sarah and her team fought with everything they had, using their knowledge of the ship's layout to outmaneuver the Vrak, forcing them into tight spaces where their superior size and firepower were less of an advantage. Jada was the first to take down a soldier, sending a burst of fire that incapacitated one of the invaders with precision. "Keep moving," she called out as her rifle cracked with each shot. The Vrak began to retreat into the shadows, their retreat signaling the beginning of a desperate fight for survival. The team didn't wait to celebrate their small victory, they kept pushing forward, each step taking them closer to the docking bay. The ship's alarms were blaring louder now, and the tremors in the walls had become almost unbearable. The Vakther was dying, and they had to escape before it took them with it. The docking bay loomed ahead, but the last stretch of the hallway was filled with even more Vrak. The invaders, realizing they were facing the humans who had just struck a devastating blow to their empire, had regrouped. They were closing in, blocking the final escape route. Sarah didn't hesitate. "We fight to the end," she ordered, rallying her team. They pushed forward with all their strength, weapons raised, ready to defend themselves to the last. But before they could make contact, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "This is your captain speaking," Marcus said into his comm unit, voice surprisingly calm. "I've got the ship powered up and the thrusters primed. I suggest you get in here now, or we're going to have some serious problems." The team exchanged a look of disbelief. "You're sure it's going to hold?" Sarah asked, still firing on the Vrak advancing toward them. "It's a gamble, but it's our best shot," Marcus replied. "I don't care what happens to the Vakther, but I'm getting us off it." Sarah didn't waste another second. "On my mark, move." With a battle cry, the team surged forward, sprinting through the last stretch of hallway and into the docking bay. Vrak soldiers fired at them, but the humans were already entering the ship. Marcus gunned the thrusters, and the stolen Vrak vessel lurched into motion just as the docking doors slammed shut behind them. The force of the movement pushed them back against their seats as the escape ship rocketed away from the doomed flagship. "Hold on!" Marcus shouted, his voice tinged with adrenaline. The ship shook violently as the Vokter, its internal systems unstable and unable to correct its course, plummeted toward the nearby moon's surface. It wouldn't be long before the entire structure was obliterated. Just as they cleared the debris zone, the explosion followed. The Vokter erupted in a fiery display, tearing apart in a massive chain reaction. The shockwave rattled their stolen vessel, but they were far enough to avoid the worst of it. Sarah exhaled sharply as the intensity of the escape subsided. For a moment, there was only silence. Did we just? Jada's voice trailed off, still in disbelief. We did, Sarah said, staring out the viewport at the glowing remnants of the Vrok flagship, now reduced to little more than space debris. We've taken down the heart of their empire. Marcus gave a short laugh, half exhausted, half triumphant. And I'd say we did it with style. But Sarah knew this victory, as sweet as it was just the beginning. The Vokter was only one ship. One command vessel. The Vrok were still out there, scattered but not defeated. This was the beginning of a long and bloody campaign. We've dealt them a blow they won't recover from easily, Sarah said quietly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the stars. But the war is far from over. As the stolen ship drifted into the safety of deep space, Sarah Caldwell and her team allowed themselves a moment of reprieve. But only for a moment. They had proven humanity's worth on the battlefield, but the real challenge was still ahead. The Vrok would come for them. And when they did, humanity would be ready to fight again. In the vastness of space, the reckoning had only just begun. Days had passed since the destruction of the Vokter, and though they had been far from the immediate aftermath of the explosion, Sarah Caldwell could still feel the heat of the battle in her bones. The war had entered a new phase, a phase where humanity had not only become a thorn in the side of the Vrok Empire, but a true threat to their supremacy. The team had made their way to an undisclosed asteroid field, a neutral zone where human forces had begun to regroup after the relentless onslaught. The safe house was small, a hidden base carved into the heart of an asteroid, far from the watchful eyes of the Vrok. Still, Sarah knew that safety was a fleeting illusion. The Vrok were relentless, and even now, their response was unfolding. The resistance had fought with everything they had, from guerrilla tactics to sabotage, but the resources and support needed to mount a true counteroffensive were still lacking. There had been no massive fleet of human warships, no overwhelming superiority of firepower. Instead, they relied on ingenuity, stealth, and most of all, their will to survive. And with the destruction of the Vokter, a new fire had ignited across Earth and its colonies. Sarah sat at the war table, poring over the latest intelligence reports. The Vrok had mobilized their remaining forces, consolidating their strength in the heart of their empire. They were regrouping, but there was something new in the air, uncertainty. The loss of Vokter, their most powerful leader, had destabilized their ranks. Without their command center, the Vrok were fractured, each warlord now vying for control of the remnants of the fleet. Sarah, Marcus called out, his voice serious. We've got a problem. She looked up from the holographic map, sensing the gravity in his tone. What is it? There's been a communications breach, Marcus said, his fingers tapping furiously on the console. The Vrok know we're alive. And worse, they've sent a message directly to us. Sarah's brow furrowed. A message? Jada, who had been monitoring the ship's perimeter, turned to face her, her expression tight. It's not just a message. It's a threat. Marcus activated the transmission, and the cold, mechanical voice of the Vrok's new leader, Korath, filled the room. Human scum, the voice hissed. You think you can kill our commanders and cripple our fleets without consequence? You are insects, mere pests. Your time is running out. The hologram flickered for a moment before continuing. The Vrok Empire will hunt you down, one by one. No corner of this galaxy will be safe from us. Your victory at Vokter was a fleeting flame. The wrath of the Vrok will burn through your pathetic resistance, and in the end, your bodies will be scattered across the stars. We will reclaim what is ours. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the room in a tense silence. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She had heard the threats before, but something about this new leader, Korath, felt different. There was an intensity, a coldness to the words that hinted at a power even more dangerous than Voker's. "Well, that's just lovely," Marcus muttered, running a hand through his hair. "The Vrak were never known for their charm, but this guy? He means business." Jada stood up, her expression hardening. "We've taken down one leader, but this Korath? He's coming for us. And he's not going to make the same mistakes Voker made." Sarah pushed herself up from the table, determination settling in her chest. "We're not going to wait for him to come to us. We're going on the offensive." Marcus looked at her in surprise. "You're serious? You want to hit them before they organize?" Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "We can't afford to give them time to regroup. We've proven we can hit them where it hurts. Now, we take the fight directly to Koratha's stronghold." The team exchanged glances. It was a risky move, but Sarah knew the longer they waited, the more the Vrak would solidify their power. They had to strike before the Vrak could reorganize, before they could turn the tables. "We'll need intel," Sarah continued, as she began pacing. "We need to know where Koratha's base of operations is and how to get in without being noticed." Jada stepped forward. "I'll hack into their communications network. It won't be easy, but if anyone can pull it off, it's me." "Good," Sarah said, turning back to Marcus. "And you?" "I'll prep the ship for a quick jump," Marcus responded. "But we'll need a distraction to get in. Something big enough to draw their attention away from the real mission." Sarah's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. "We'll create chaos. Hit their supply lines, stir up their fleets. Koratha's not just a leader, he's a symbol. He won't be able to resist coming out of hiding." The team quickly got to work. They spent the next few days preparing for their most audacious mission yet, an all-out strike against the heart of the Vrak. But as the plan took shape, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was their last chance to stop the Vrak before their enemies could strike back with devastating force. On the eve of their departure, Sarah stood alone in the darkened hangar, staring out into the cold abyss of space. The stars blinked at her, distant and indifferent, but she knew that humanity had come far from the desperate, unorganized force they had once been. They had proven their strength, their will to fight. Now, they would see if they had the courage to face the full wrath of the Vrak. The war was no longer about survival. It was about victory. It was about showing the universe that humanity's resolve could not be broken. Korath thought they were insects. But it was time for humanity to prove that even the smallest spark could ignite a wildfire. "We're ready," Sarah whispered to herself, her gaze never leaving the stars. Tomorrow, the fire of resistance would burn brighter than ever. The quiet hum of the engines reverberated through the hull of the ship, a steady reminder of the mission that lay ahead. The crew had gathered in the command center, tense but resolute. After days of preparation, it was time to face Korath, the new leader of the Vrak, in what would be the final battle for humanity's survival. The plan was audacious, but it had to work. They had gathered intel, disrupted supply lines, and created enough chaos in the Vrak fleet to lure Korath out of hiding. The Vrak, despite their fearsome reputation, were still reeling from the loss of Voker. Koratha's rise had thrown the Empire into disarray, and Sarah Caldwell intended to use that to her advantage. But despite the strength of their resolve, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. The Vrak were a relentless enemy, and even now, as they prepared to strike, she knew that Korath was no ordinary leader. His reputation was terrifying. He was a strategist, a conqueror with a cold, calculated mind. Voker's raw aggression had been dangerous, but Koratha's calm, methodical approach would be even harder to defeat. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice steady but tinged with the gravity of the moment. "We've done our part to destabilize the Vrak. Now we go for the throat. We hit Koratha's flagship, destroy his command structure, and send a message he'll never forget." Marcus Lee, ever the practical one, was double-checking their weapon systems. "You sure about this?" We're not just hitting a base or a ship, we're going for their high command. This'll be the most dangerous mission we've faced so far. I'm sure, Sarah said, turning to face her team. We take out Korath, and the Vrak will crumble. We've already proven we can strike at their heart. But this time, we finish the job. Jada's fingers were moving over her console, already starting the process of hacking into Vrak communications. I've got eyes on their movements. They're not expecting an attack this deep in their territory. We've got a clear path in. Good, Sarah said, feeling a flicker of hope. It had been months of fighting, of waiting for an opening, and now that it had arrived, she would not waste it. Once we get in, we disable their command systems. We cripple their fleet. And then we take Korath down, personally. Personal, huh? Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. You sure that's wise? Sarah's expression hardened. He's not just another enemy. He's the face of the Vrak. If we can't take him out, then everything we've fought for is meaningless. With the mission decided, the team gathered their gear and made final preparations. Jada would disable key systems, Marcus would pilot their ship through the heart of Vrak-controlled space, and Sarah would lead the assault, taking them directly to Koratha's flagship, where the final confrontation would unfold. As they made the jump into the heart of enemy space, the tension was palpable. The Vrak might not have expected them to strike so soon, but they weren't blind. Korath would have already reinforced his defenses. Brace yourselves, Marcus called over the comms as their ship broke through the enemy's outer defenses and entered Koratha's heavily guarded sector. They passed through Vrak fleet formations, dodging fire as they executed a rapid and precise evasive maneuver. The crew's hearts raced, but they stayed focused on the task at hand. In the distance, the colossal shape of Koratha's flagship came into view, a monstrous, blackened behemoth that loomed in the void. Its vast hull was lined with massive weaponry, and its very presence seemed to embody the cold might of the Vrak. We're almost there, Sarah said, standing at the front of the ship, eyes fixed on the target. Jada, do your thing. Disable their systems. I'm on it, Jada replied, fingers flying across her console. The ship shook as they neared the flagship, and Sarah's pulse quickened. It was now or never. Suddenly, a burst of static came through the comms. Koratha's voice, chilling and smooth, echoed in their ears. You've done well to make it this far, humans. But this is where your journey ends. You cannot defeat me. You cannot defeat the Vrak. We're not trying to defeat the Vrak, Sarah shot back, her voice unwavering. We're here to end your reign. The flagship's defenses activated, energy shields pulsing to life, and a wave of Vrak fighter ships launched from the massive hangar bay, swarming toward them in an attack formation. Marcus's hands were a blur on the controls as he maneuvered the ship, avoiding the incoming fire with expert precision. We're not getting out of here without a fight. Marcus yelled, weaving through a barrage of laser fire. I didn't expect anything less, Sarah said, turning to the team. We fight for humanity. We fight for Earth. The battle was a deadly dance, the stolen ship darting through the stars as Vrak ships surrounded them. Jada's fingers flew across her console, hacking into the Vrak's communications and systems, causing chaos in the enemy's ranks. Koratha's flagship, though formidable, began to show signs of strain as their coordinated attack began to take effect. With a final surge of adrenaline, Sarah barked her orders. Prepare to board. The team deployed onto the flagship's hull, using the chaos of battle to their advantage. The massive flagship's interior was a maze of steel and weaponry, and the team fought tooth and nail to advance. Every step was met with fierce resistance from the Vrak soldiers, but humanity's determination proved stronger. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Sarah and her team reached the heart of the flagship, Koratha's command center. The door slid open, revealing the cold figure of the Vrak leader, standing at the heart of his empire. His yellow eyes glinted with malice, his posture unwavering. You have made it this far, Korath said, his voice like ice, but now, you die. He raised his hand, and the room erupted with energy blasts. Sarah's heart raced, but she was ready. The fight for humanity's future was about to begin. With a cry, Sarah led the charge, and the final battle between the Vrock and the human resistance began. Each strike was filled with the weight of everything they had fought for, the survival of the human race. And as Sarah faced Korath in that final moment, one truth was clear: humanity would not go down without a fight.